Okay, it's 7 o'clock, so we'll call to order this regular meeting of Council of February 6th. Just ask for a motion to approve the agenda, please. Councillor White, thank you. Councillor Valeria, thank you. All in favor? That's carried. Got a bit of a skeleton crew tonight. Councillor Lumley's on vacation. Councillor Sanjanko has got some business in Calgary. Promoting BC wines right now, probably. Sorry, shouldn't have said that. CAO is at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and our corporate officers on vacation as well. Okay, just a couple of, or just a set of minutes there to adopt. Just ask for a motion to adopt those, please. Councillor Valeria, thank you. Councillor White, all in favor, and that's carried. Ms. Polly, welcome. You're here representing the Sunshine Coast Secular Humanist Association, is that correct? Yeah, nice to see you. And I understand you don't, is there anything that you wish to say tonight, or you don't want to, no? Yeah. Yeah, a pleasure. So I'll just read the proclamation then. So whereas February 12, 2018 is the anniversary of the birth of Charles Darwin in 1809, and whereas Darwin's work has made great contributions to the human understanding of our world and the universe we live in, and whereas that understanding led to and continues to lead to advances in technology, medicine, and philosophy, and whereas those advancements through the efforts of the women and men of science have helped to relieve suffering and prolong life, and whereas Darwin has been chosen to symbolize those advancements, and whereas the anniversary of Darwin's birthday is an appropriate time in which to reflect and celebrate the importance of scientific advancements to all people, now therefore I, Wayne Rowe, Mayor of the Town of Gibsons, do hereby officially proclaim that February 12, 2018 be known as Darwin Day in the Town of Gibsons. So I'll leave this with you, and I thank you for coming out this evening. Okay, so 6.1 is just a motion to receive the minutes of the December 19 committee meeting. Councillor White, Councillor Valeria, all in favor, and that's carried. 6.2.1 to receive the minutes of the January 23 committee of the whole meeting. So I'll separate these out. Councillor Valeria, Councillor White, all in favor, and that's carried. 6.2.2 is the recommendation that staff report back on the results of the January 30 public information meeting. That was with respect to the Eagle Crest zoning. Were you in attendance at that one, Ms. Stats?
I was there, yes.
Okay, so we'll hear back from you eventually on that one? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just ask for that motion, please. Councillor White, Councillor Valeria, all in favor, and that's carried. Okay, so 6.2.3 has to do with the sidewalk condition down below us here, and some attempts to rectify things, as well as the installation of electric vehicle charging stations. So I know we had some discussions at committee earlier today about whether we want to go forward with the resolution as it is, or some looking at some changes. So maybe I'll go to Councillor Valeria.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for the discussion this afternoon. I'm open to of course, hearing from the rest of the councillors, but I thought that a simple change would make sense. So I'm willing to move the recommendation with the amendment of the removal of an existing tree in place of existing trees, and leave it at that. I think the discussion said that the cost was still reasonable, and the planters and new trees were good kind of remedial aspects to this. So move that amendment along with the rest of the recommendation.
Second that. So staff is clear on what's being attempted here. with this resolution? Are we all on the same page on this one?
I certainly hope so. So the intent was to remove the worst, or the tree that is causing the most damage, and some possible replacement of a sidewalk panel adjacent to the second worst. I believe we recognize that this is a little bit like a phased approach. We're not anticipating the problem is going to go away anytime soon. But the resolution would also include using the remaining funds for planting additional street trees. And so by taking this phased approach, it'll allow the street trees or the new street trees become more established before the removal of any more of the established trees there becomes absolutely essential. And there is most definitely a focus on public safety along here, because we do definitely have some tripping hazards, and we need to address those for the safety of the public.
Thanks for your work on that, David, and also for the input that we did have from residents with respect to what we're trying to accomplish down there. It's always trying to find that balance that works for people. Okay, moving to 7.1. Right. Okay, so over to planning.
Thank you, Mayor Rowe. The application is for a development permit for form and character and a development variance permit to allow an 864 square foot garden suite above a garage as a new build. The purpose of the report is to obtain direction on beginning neighborhood notification process required for all DVP applications. The property is on Gower Point Road with rear access from Beachcomber Lane, and it's on a sloped lot with a house on it. The applicant proposes to construct the building into the grade, resulting in a 2-story building as seen from the lane and a 1-story building as seen from Gower Point Road. The owners intend on moving into the garden suite and renting their home out. The property is within the view protection area, so the building has a 4-meter height limit. Garden suites are limited to a building floor area of 14% of the lot area, and the second floor is limited to 75% of the first floor. So because the proposal is a suite over a garage, they're asking for a variance to increase the height to 5.8 meters instead of 4 meters, to allow a building floor area of the structure to be 18% of the lot area instead of 14%, and to allow a building floor area on the second story to be 100% of the building floor area on the first floor instead of 75%. So staff are recommending proceeding with the neighbor notification process, and then following receipt of comments, staff will prepare a report and bring it back to a future committee or council meeting with a recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Questions or comments on this one, Councillor White?
I know the Area Planning Commission discussed this quite extensively and had some recommendations in terms of suggestions for the developer, and I'm just wondering if there's been any developments since then to pursue those recommendations from the APC. I know they were generally decided to support it, but with some suggestions.
The APC probably discussed the development permit for form and character in more detail, and that would be brought forward at a future committee meeting.
Okay.
Really easy to put this out and notify the neighbors to see what concerns there might be, so I'll move it.
Okay, and move that. And second, Councillor Valerian. Certainly at this stage, this is what it's for, is to notify the neighbors and see what the feeling is there. I took a drive by it this afternoon just to see what the lay of the land was, and it seems like it's a possibility. Just a lot of variances, I guess. Just for we've got a relatively new bylaw dealing with garden suites, and now we're already starting to massage it out into different things. But we'll see what information we hear back when you report back after notification. Okay, all in favor then? Okay, that's carried. Okay, so then we have 7.2. This is the liquor license change for 537 Cruise Lane.
Okay, this referral is from the Liquor Control and Licensing Branch for a change to the liquor license for Gibsons Tap Works to add a covered rooftop patio and extend operating hours. The Liquor Control and Licensing Branch is requesting that the town gather public input and provide a response to the referral on the proposed changes. So the purpose of the report is to brief council on the proposal and obtain direction on beginning the notification process. A form and character development permit will be required and will be presented to council at a later date. The proposed covered rooftop patio will contain a small storage area, a washroom, and an open seating area. The patio has been designed to limit impacts of noise with a wall along the east property line. The patio will be open on the front of the building and to the west to take advantage of ocean views. Currently, operating hours are from noon to 11, Sunday to Thursday, and noon to midnight, Friday and Saturday. The proposed operating hours are going to be from 9 a.m. to midnight, 7 days a week. The outdoor patio will close 1 hour earlier than the indoor tasting lounge. So the town is requested to comment on the impact of noise on nearby residents, the impact on the community if the application is approved, the view of residents and a description of the method used to gather their views, and a local recommendation, including whether or not the application be approved and the reasons on which they are based. So staff are recommending proceeding with the notifications as per Town Policy 1.26, which includes a newspaper advertisement for 2 weeks in a row, notice to neighbors within 100 meters of the site, and seeking comments from the RCMP.
Okay, thank you. Questions or comments from members of council? And again, this is going out as a notification process to see what we hear back. I will say, I have talked to some of the residents in the residential part adjacent to this property. They've certainly expressed satisfaction with the efforts by the operators of Tap Works to be considerate and conscious, I guess, of impacts on residents in that area. This could be quite a bit of a change for them, so I would certainly suggest that you will want to engage the neighbors very fully before this comes back. I would think. But, yeah, Councillor Valerian.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Never quite sure whether to bring up any concerns or questions at this stage or wait for the community to chime in and then see if they're in line. But generally, I'm in favor of notifying and getting some feedback. Just one question was capacity of the brewery will remain at 52% occupancy. So I'm just wanting to understand how you add seating and then remain the same occupancy. Was the occupancy given with anticipation of the rooftop patio, or how does that work?
Thank you. The occupancy would have to remain at a 52 person capacity because right now they don't have enough parking to allow more than that. The applicant had a variance issued in 2016, I believe, to reduce the parking requirements. So either they would have to apply for another variance to reduce the parking requirements for the rooftop if they were filled at a maximum capacity, or the town would have to complete a parking study for the area. So right now it would remain at a 52 capacity, max capacity.
Okay. And that's dictated by the parking requirements at this point. number of parking spaces available, as opposed to the liquor license itself.
Well, they're applying for the change to the liquor license, but right now the limitation is the parking.
Okay, Councillor Valeria.
Thanks. Parking was the other thought I had, which I thought we had an innovative, a good solution with the previous application to add the 6 spots on Gibsons Way. I since started talking to the Coast Car Co-op, and they were saying they're trying to remain viable and offering potentially a co-op car as a replacement for parking spots. And I don't know that it's an opportunity. I'm not going to ask staff. I'm just putting it out there as in future, if we have these parking crunches, maybe we could consider that as a possible replacement, because we managed to wedge in 6 spots for this in this case, but I don't know that it'll be that easy going forward. So just a bit of an aside, but I know that parking was a challenge on this one, and maybe it may become a challenge again. So I'll leave it there.
All right, thank you. Okay, we have a mover then of the recommendation, Councillor White, Councillor Valeriot. Okay, all in favor? It's carried. We'll see what we hear back from the neighborhood. Okay, council reports. Councillor Valeriot, anything from yourself this evening?
Yeah, we're making good time, so I'll take a minute. We held a community dialogue number 4 last Tuesday at the Public Art Gallery, which was reasonably well attended for budget, and there was some genuine interest in the town's budget and some good, respectful discussion. I really want to thank staff, particularly Mr. Douglas and Elizabeth, as well as probably Mr. Newman had some input. Really good, 5 pages or 7 pages of really good distilled budget information, and I think people were able to look at it and sort of understand where our budget process, and there was some good input. So got my first opportunity to do the Coast Cable Local Government Show. That was fun. More enjoyable than I expected, and the hour went by quickly. And I'm just going to take, just on a quick personal note, yesterday my now 4-year-old daughter had minor surgery to remove a medical device that she's had in for 2 years, so it brings to a close kind of a 2.5-year journey that's had a really good outcome. But I'd like to think it hasn't affected my work, but I know that that's not always the case, so I appreciate the patience of council and staff with my somewhat distractedness at times. But anyway, closing that chapter feels very, very satisfying, and that's all for me tonight. Thanks.
Support. I don't think I had a holiday I snuck in a holiday as well for a week there in between meetings, but I don't think I missed any of the liaison meetings. Most of those happened prior to our last meeting, being the library, the market, and the museum. I have been monitoring the opening of the homeless shelter on Gower Point Road. There's a lot of community interest in that, including some community concerns that have been brought forward by neighbors. Those have been passed on to Rain City, who have been very diligent in responding. I just dropped by there tonight because I was actually on my way home, since my in-laws live in the neighborhood, and the shelter happens to be right between my house and their place. And there's about seven people who are using the shelter the last couple nights. It was very quiet tonight. I think it was a little busier on the first night. Understandably, there were quite a number of volunteers who were there, and there's a special thanks really needs to go out to Spaney Developments and Olson Electric for doing some renovations, fitting it into their schedules to donate their time to work on the church, and of course to Christ the King for hosting. And I'm continuing to keep in touch with them to make sure there's a good mix and a good immersion into the community, and any concerns from neighbors are addressed, and it seems to be going well so far.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was smiling a bit, I guess, when Councillor O'Leary was talking about his first stab at Coast Cable. Talk to your local government, because I was supposed to be there for the town, and Councillor O'Leary was there for the regional district. I had it in my book for 7 o'clock at night, and 1 minute to 4 in the afternoon, I get a text from Councillor Valerian asking why I'm not there, and which I couldn't make it at that point. So he ended up covering for the town and the regional district. So I hope he and Sean had a really good conversation.
Maybe some changes in town policy.
Yeah. And so, Councillor Valeria, I will also just in connection, I'm glad to hear that things are well in your family, and I can assure you that you've carried your part of the load throughout this term. So don't have any apologies for that at all. I think the only other thing I'll just mention, I just had the opportunity to attend part of the China-Canada hockey tournament that was going on here on the weekend. And certainly congratulate members and volunteers of Sunshine Coast Minor Hockey in making that a very successful event, I think, and welcoming members from China and showing them a good time. And it seemed like everybody was certainly enjoying the event. And it's part of the program to help China get ready for the 2022 Olympics. So hopefully we won't help them too much, but just enough. Okay, any inquiries this evening? Would you just take the microphone, please, and just state your name and place of residence?
Thank you. My name is Jeff Gornell. I'm a resident of 813 Bayview Heights Road. I'm also representing Gibsons Tapworks tonight. One piece of clarification, or I guess general inquiry, would be based on our application. You referenced our parking variance. Now, the process with the LCLB involves the stamping of a floor plan, and any amendment to that floor plan requires an initial start over of the entire application process. So ideally, we'd have our floor plan with the future occupancy being 96. However, we're requesting that we operate as though we have an occupancy of 52 until we can complete the parking study or have a variance in place. And I just wanted to get council's thoughts on that. Thank you.
Well, I don't think that we're probably in a position to really give you any comments on this at this point. I mean, I think obviously concerns right from the very beginning of your development, certainly focused around parking issues. Some of what I expect we'll hear back from our staff eventually when the report does come back is whether there have been any significant negative impacts or issues around that. As I said in my earlier comments, I think the neighborhood is generally supportive of what you're doing, but you always have to be a bit careful of when you get too far out on that bubble, because then it can kind of not work quite as well. So we have to be alert to that. So that there'll be more discussion when this one comes back at this point, Mr. Cordnell. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, good evening. Brian Sadler, 812 Bayview Heights Road. If you will forgive me for not having been here for 15 months, but I do have a question with some background. It's about the shelter and the disappointment about no public discussion, just the briefing that we received that Monday night. And the second point, I understand that the emergency cold weather shelter has now transmogrified into a cold weather shelter. I don't know if that's true, but it's the hot rumor on the street via the Patriarch of Christ the King Church. Yes, you can interrupt me if you want. Okay. The 1015 Venture Way sign has a sign that says, I quote, "Do not occupy due to fire and life safety issues," unquote. There is no such sign or any signs on the current homeless shelter, such as the yellow sign dictating that a permit has been granted by the town. And in my letter to the CAO 2 weeks ago, for which I received a nice receipt, I'm concerned that the staff have not yet been involved directly. And although I haven't been here for 15 months, this is the first time I've heard of the shelter being discussed in public, other than the meeting on Monday. The current, I can't even read it, the current zoning for that church or shelter is PA for public assembly, and I don't think public assembly includes accommodation. You can correct me if I'm wrong. The lack of permits and signs for the same shelter does not comply with the town's bylaw on development. I don't pretend to be an expert, but I've read the bylaw more than once recently. And also, I have here a Town of Gibsons folder titled "Building or Renovating a Home." And it goes into some detail as to what permits are required and documentation and inspections, etc., etc. So the shelter, to my knowledge, has not conducted procedures according with the town pamphlet. Another question I don't know, but I do understand, fire chief inspection is required for accommodation or conversion to accommodation. And it may also include the need for sprinklers, the same way when the Key restaurant that used to be Opa was converted to Swish, the town stipulated and never gave up on John, the owner of the building, installing a sprinkler system. And of course, the other thing that is revealed is the NBC, which is the National Building Code, is national. Yes, it is deferred or passed on to each province so that the province can implement further changes according to their environmental zone. And of course, the environments of different provinces are different. Then the province will pass it on to the town or municipality such that they can incorporate bylaws, including the allocation of permits. So, just to wrap up, in the meantime, no public discussion, nor staff inputs to any of the council agendas that I've read during the last 15 months. Thank you for your time. I don't expect any answers right now, but I wanted to point out discrepancies in the process.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Sadler. I appreciate those comments. I'm not sure that I saw the letter that you may have sent to the CAO. I'll have to check when he gets back.
I did get a response from yourself.
I signed it?
Yes.
Well, there you go.
But I purposefully wrote it to the CAO.
Right.
because to write it to council or to yourself as mayor and council would introduce it into the public venue, and I did not want that. I wanted to
that's fine.
back it up.
Okay. Well, you raised some points there. I'll just ask Councillor White if he's able to comment on the the distinction between cold weather and emergency cold weather you referred to.
I can't comment on most of it, but I did hear that the building inspector may have visited the building last week. That might address some of those concerns, so the staff may want to address that. I know from Christ the King that the fire department did an inspection as well 3 weeks ago, and they worked with the fire department. And yeah, specifically about the cold weather shelter versus extreme weather, that was discussed at the meeting that was 2 Monday nights ago, I guess, about the distinction between them, which is one would be cold weather would be every night from now until March 31st, and I think that's where there were comments about it being 2 months rather than, and the logistics of I think Clarence Lee from St. Hilda's spoke in particular about the logistics of emergency cold weather shelter and needing to determine whether each night fit the criteria, and having to put a lot of effort out into notifying the community and getting staffing but the main point is that BC Housing supported a cold weather shelter for every night, so the funding was for every night. So that's what was discussed at the evening where all three of us were in attendance. So that's what I recall from that, I think that's all. Yeah, that's all I'm aware of those comments that I think. Okay. When it comes to public assembly and building inspection, that's something that staff would need to.
Right. Yeah. So I believe that the staff is kind of working with this organization to try to address some of these. It's one of these situations. There was an element of urgency, and it came up again at our committee meeting today. A number of people that are actually living in their vehicles right now on the streets in Gibsons because they have no place to go. So there was certainly an area was felt to be significant concern that affected people in our community. So steps are taken to address that, and we're going to try and work through these issues. And sometimes you take the action first and try to figure out how you're going to deal with some of these things, which I think you know from your military experience.
Yes, thank you. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that I've been very busy answering phone calls and emails from a lot of concerned citizens. Philosophy aside, they're not very happy with the open-ended development that the shelter might present to the neighborhood, especially when there are other sites that I pointed out in my letter, not least of which is the one on Venture Way opposite the GRD, the one that was closed down a few months ago because of zoning improprieties. And I also understand from the meeting that we had 2 Mondays ago that the old Mountie building is eyeballed for some other purpose, like low-income housing as opposed to a shelter.
Yeah, it's hard to say where I'm told that we can expect a visit from some representatives from BC Housing in the next couple of weeks to look at that particular site, and it would probably be more in the view of I suspect they'd be looking at more of a transition type housing as opposed to cold weather shelters or things like that, is what I believe, but I can't say anything definitive on that because it will depend on what they're prepared to fund or not fund on that site.
Well, no offense to the staff, but yes, the building inspector did visit twice and sent detailed responses to the querier. and who forwarded them on to me. I just had brain fade and lost where I was going. He likened it as in the current situation as being less disruptive to the community, to the neighborhood, than church meetings that used to be held there. Well, I fail to see how 7 to 12 possible nightly occupants would be less disruptive than once a week church meetings. So I don't want to criticize or sound like I'm criticizing the building inspector, but his logic fails to reach me. Anyway.
Thank you for your comments.
I'll leave it with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want to go ahead? Go ahead.
Just on the open-ended, it's definitely to March 31st, and that's where the funding ends, end of March 31st. So there's no, I think St. Hilda's, in the past, because of when weather conditions were cold enough, they did have extensions, but only because of cold weather, and the church would have to agree to that too. So I think the agreement now is to March 31st as a final date. And I know a little bit about that Venture Way building. Actually, it's been sold, and it's been sold to new owners who are renovating it right now. So it's a privately owned, and I believe I'm pretty sure the no occupancy would still apply because they're still renovating it, but certainly wouldn't be available for a use like this. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Sadler. Good to see you here. Any further inquiries this evening?
Hi, good evening. John Jeffries, 800 Bayview Heights. I just wanted to do a little follow-up on Mr. Sadler's comments here. And it revolves around this permit situation. As we all know, doing any type of renovation in the town of Gibsons typically does require a permit to be applied for and received from the town. That being said, picking and choosing who has to have a permit should not be happening in a situation like that. And I do believe one of the comments I did see the response Mr. Sadler got, and the response was, well, it wasn't really a big development. But when you're changing, you've got electrical contractors in, you've got, plumbing, extra toilets. This is a bigger thing than just putting in a new sink. I mean, I understand they've done kitchens. I'm not sure. But I got to say, I mean, I am absolutely 100% in support of helping the homeless here. We need help for these people. They're on the streets. We see them. We know they're there. The situation of putting them into places because there's an urgent situation is one thing. But I just have to say, I think there needs to be some responsibility. 3 months ago, for a fire inspection, a major renovation has taken place and you do not have a fire inspection. There are people sleeping in there every night. If a fire happens, who wants to stand up and be responsible for the deaths of people because a fire inspection was not mandated? Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jeffries. Any further inquiries this evening? And if not, we have to deal with a couple of closed items, so I'm going to ask for a motion to close as set out. Councillor Valeria, Councillor White, all in favor? And that's carried. So it'll take about 5 minutes.